Hey there, everyone. So I'm John Sutter. This is Edith McNamee. And we recently did a project on slavery in Mauritania for CNN, and we're having this hangout as sort of an experiment to talk with you all about the reporting that we did and answer some of your questions. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on this report, so thanks very much for that. This is sort of an informal session. If you want to join the live video chat, feel free to jump in with questions. You can also put them in the group text chat if you'd like to submit them, or I'm at JD Sutter on Twitter, SUTTER. If you want to send in a question that way, then we can try to address it. Just so you know, the overall project is online at cnn.com/slavery, SLAVERY, if you want to have some background or look through that. So we have a few people on the chat now live. I'm going to go to Carlos, who joined us with a couple comments on our post earlier and had a question he wanted to start out with. So Carlos, why don't you kick it off?
Hey John, thanks for having us and hosting the Hangout. I guess my first comment really is, what is the status of slavery in Mauritania, and what kind of infrastructure is slavery supporting? I mean, the economic infrastructure. I mean, why does it even exist right now in the state now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Edith, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, the status, I guess, legally is that it was technically abolished in 1981, but it was just abolished in name only, and they didn't pass any laws to be able to convict anyone who had slaves until as recently as 2007. And even since then, they've only ever convicted one slave owner. So yes, by law, technically everything has been abolished, but just like in the United States, just because you've said it's no longer allowed doesn't mean that people still don't do it. And that's, I guess, the basic status.
Yeah, and just some background on the country in general. It's in West Africa, like on the edge of the Sahara Desert. If we talked to the UN's expert on modern forms of slavery, and she said as much as 10 to 20% of people in Mauritania exist in some form of slavery today. Like on our trip, we found people living sort of in this great spectrum between slavery and freedom. So there's some people who, are working land or working in someone's house or are tending to herds, like out in the desert. There are also people who sort of exist, like to some degree, are owned by another person but don't live with them anymore. And even people who are freed, sometimes have a hard time of it. It's hard to like sort of make it in the bigger economy. So yeah, it's a wide spectrum, but it's particularly common in that country, and that's one of the reasons that we got interested in this and wanted to report on this subject. So Mark, I think you had a question. Do you want to chime in next?
Sure. I guess I'm just curious. I guess the biggest question I have is, what threat are the people that you've talked to kind of under now that their faces are public and their stories are kind of public? I mean, their names probably were protected, but are they, in danger now in their country, or how does that work?
So that's something that we thought a lot about. The main woman who we featured, whose name is Mohair, her real name is used and her face is used, and that was, something we did after having, conversations with her about that, and she was sort of adamant in the fact that she, wanted her story out, and she wasn't ashamed of, having been a slave, and that she thought that this was important for people to hear. So, I mean, a lot of the people we spoke with were incredibly brave and being willing to put their stories out. And I've checked up on her since the story's run, and from everything I've heard, she's still doing fine. So, that's a very good thing. But slavery is a very sensitive topic, like all around the world, and in Mauritania in particular. So that's definitely something we considered. For other people, we used, just a first name, or, in one case, we, didn't use an image out of the person's wishes if they thought that they were being put in danger. So we tried to listen to the sources and let that be at least the start of our conversation about those issues.
Also, I think that things have changed there. If we had done the story 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have been much more dangerous for them. But the abolitionist groups there are very strong. And what they told us anyway is that the government doesn't mess with them. So 5 years ago it would have been very dangerous. But now, if these ex-slaves stay close to people like Biram, people like Boubacar, it's a bit of security.
Yeah, I mean, they say that they have been arrested for their actions, but I think, I think like 5-10 years ago, this subject was, even more taboo than it is now. So, I think they probably felt more comfortable partly for that reason too.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone have a question over chat or over? I see a few people have joined the group chat. Suzanne, Jessica. Jessica started typing something. Well, I can give you a little bit more background on this project, like while a question comes in. It looks like one's coming in now. This is something that we started researching as part of CNN's Freedom Project, which has been going on for more than a year now. CNN's been doing stories on modern slavery all over the world, not just in Mauritania, hoping to shed a light on these issues and bring about some progress and some change. So this is part of that broader effort. And like I said, we got interested in Mauritania, like partly because of the statistics, how common slavery is estimated to be there, and also because of the people stories. Like we met with this one abolitionist group called SOS Slaves that was founded by a man whose family was enslaved and another man who grew up as a slave owner, which is sort of this shocking, and they said, like unprecedented partnership, which is really powerful if you think about it. So that was another one of the sort of human interest reasons that we got interested in this. So we have a question that just came in from Jessica. Edith, do you want to read that one?
Yeah, sure. She's wondering what the Mauritanian government's reaction to the article has been since the article was published, and if they've issued a response. And I believe the answer is no, they have not.
Yeah, I think we're going to give them obviously some time to respond, but I've filed a formal request with the government for a broader statement. I've asked them to sort of elaborate upon, their efforts to end slavery, because to be fair, they have made some progress. If you talk to activists, they see it as sort of baby steps. Like the law criminalizing slavery in 2007 is one. They had the one conviction of a slave owner. There is a program to give financial assistance to people who are formerly enslaved. The Mauritanian government, when we talked to them on the ground, said that slavery doesn't exist in the country. I think that program exists because they say it's only dealing with people who formerly were enslaved. So, they don't acknowledge that it's happening now, but they say that it did in the past. So, I've reached out on several fronts to try to get more information, and honestly want to be able to share more of their side of the story. So I think we just have to be a little bit patient to leave them some chance to respond there.
But an interesting reaction that we didn't anticipate, I think, was John did an interview with the US ambassador to Mauritania, and her comments on the issue, and she acknowledged that there is this problem there. And one thing we didn't know was that this is the first time in 15 years that someone from representing the United States has said, yes, this is still a problem. And the Mauritanian press has been picking up on that interview specifically, which is something we didn't anticipate. It's really interesting.
Yeah, she spoke out pretty strongly against it. Does anyone have Carlos, it looked like you were about to jump in there. Does anyone have a follow-up question on that?
Well, kind of. I'm reading here that slavery in Mauritania is racially, or I guess it is racially, socially stratified. In terms of the abolitionists, is that racially stratified as well? Do you see a lot of abolitionists who are white Moors who are pushing for abolition laws, or do you see black Moors who are really pushing that, or who's really pushing for it?
I think to some degree it's both. I think the power of that group that we mentioned, SOS Slaves, that's an abolitionist group, is partly that it was co-founded by several people, but one of them was from the white Moor class, which you mentioned, which is the group in Mauritania that historically has owned slaves. It's a lighter-skinned Arab group. So he is the person who had this incredible transformation, but through going to school in the capital. He started reading about the French Revolution and about sort of the world outside Mauritania, and had this incredible sort of realization that this whole world he was living in was unjust, and that he wanted to dedicate his life to fighting it. So I mean that definitely is something that happens, and it in some instances is supported by all classes. I think that it's probably more common to see people from the black Moor class, which you mentioned, which is the class that traditionally was enslaved, to be speaking out on this issue, as well as other ethnic groups in the country. But I think it's really powerful and interesting that there are people from the former slave-owning class that have joined in this struggle to promote equality and to promote freedom.
There is, and one of the other main abolitionist groups called IRA Mauritania is definitely primarily Haratine. Their leader
Haratine being
ex-slave class. So they've kind of they're working in parallel, they're working together, but they definitely have a different view of how things need to happen. So SOS working, white Moors, black Moors, I wouldn't say with support from the government, but with acknowledgement from the government. Whereas this other group, IRA, they're a little more militant, they're very strong, they get a lot of respect, but they're primarily Haratines and black Moors, and they don't get much acknowledgement from the government, that's for sure.
Mark, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
Sure. What? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey.
Basically, hold on. I'm getting a feedback. Hold on. Sorry about that. When was the first time you learned about the injustice that was going on there?
I really think it was about a year ago. That's one of the things. This is sort of our process of discovery here too. So CNN had this broader project on modern slavery going on, and I started just reading around on that topic in general and found stories saying that this country in West Africa was the last in the world to abolish the practice. That only happened in 1981. I was just, to be honest, sort of shocked by that year that that it's so long after many other countries addressed the issue, and that's when I started sort of looking into it and calling around to international groups that deal with slavery-related issues, and some of them who partner with organizations on the ground, and that's how I got into phone conversations with people in Mauritania, in Nouakchott, in the capital, who sort of helped introduce me around there, and that's how I found the sources and got interested and involved in the story. But I mean, I was totally naive to it. I didn't realize that there was a country where slavery was reported to be as common as it is in Mauritania. And
also the type of slavery was really interesting, because modern day slavery, one thinks about human trafficking and people who are being held against their will, whereas this is people being held often with their will. And that was something really different, something very old world. Yeah,
I mean, it's the old form of descendant-based slavery that sort of echoes the U.S. before the Civil War, that in some cases goes on there, or is the legacy system that leaves people in sort of this limbo that they find themselves in after they're liberated. And a lot of the CNN Freedom Project stories have focused on trafficking or sex slavery, these sort of more modern occurrences in a way. But this is people who have written about Mauritania have said that it's stuck in time in some respects. So yeah, we just sort of got fascinated by it and started looking in there. I saw that Jessica asked a follow-up question, how, over text, how we found out about SOS slaves in particular. And it was through a group called Anti-Slavery International is how I first got linked up with someone from SOS slaves. They're a group based out of London. They partner with them, and that's sort of how that works. Hey, looks like someone else just joined the chat. Hello? Suzanne? Okay, we can wait for them to come in. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask?
Or a comment.
Or a comment. Yeah, you feel free to throw in your your take on the story or what we've been talking about.
I'd like you to speak a little bit more about the similarities and differences between U.S. antebellum slavery and modern-day slavery in Mauritania. Can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, Edith, do you want to talk about that?
Well, I guess the way a lot of the abolitionists compared it was that like the longer, if your parents are in it and you're born into it, and that's all you know about your life, and that's one of the problems they're having right now. And they're also in that state, sort of, I guess, post-Civil War U.S., where people are supposed to be free, but, I mean, if no one's going to come and make you give away your slaves, then you're not going to give them away. And so I guess that's what a lot of the comparisons that are being drawn. Also, even if your slave does escape, they don't necessarily have the skills to make it in the real world outside of just farming or herding animals. So that's another one of the problems, is there's these families who are free, but they have absolutely no way to support themselves. So the government, not the government, so these abolitionist groups are trying to encourage people to I guess, teach ex-slaves some skills so that they don't have to go back to their master for support.
Yeah, did you touch on the chains issue? Like
No.
So one abolitionist we talked with told us that one of the main differences is that slaves in the U.S. were chained and like sort of held by force, and that in a lot of cases, you know, slaves in Mauritania aren't chained that way anymore. He said it's sort of by more complex means, where you're sort of in a psychological state of slavery and don't even think about running or don't want to run. It's like sort of even more sad in a way to me, because it's you know, he said that some of them have become so submissive that they don't see outside their world and don't, you know, want to even try to escape it. There are other cases. We talked to escaped slaves who said that they watched their friends be beaten or killed, like in trying to escape, and that was a deterrent for them from trying to leave. So there are other instances, but you know, sometimes people aren't, you know, there's nothing physical that restricts them from leaving, but that they just sort of fall into the system that's been going on in some cases for centuries.
Also, I guess, like, since the government is, at least in the interview we did with them, they're saying that everything is done. Like, we passed the laws, we're done. Like, the U.S. passed laws more than 100 years ago, and we're still not done. So it's going to take more than just those laws to do it. And if they acknowledge the problem, that's, again, like, the first step to kind of dealing with it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think Suzanne has a question from the chat. She said, how does someone get involved, or how does someone help? And I'm glad you asked that, for sure, because I think there are, you know, several things you can do. Like this situation seems sort of, you know, so huge. It's this whole faraway country that we're talking about. But there are a few small tangible things. Like if you go to cnn.com/freedom, it's our Freedom Project blog. There's a post on there called How to Help, and it has a link to a page that Anti-Slavery International set up for a school or a sort of training center for women who have escaped slavery. And we visited that school, and it was sort of one of the really bright spots of our trip. You know, these women are learning different skills, like how to sew, how to cook professionally, and then they hope to open their own businesses one day. So, you know, I think that is an interesting program, and one that they say is in need of funding, so there's that support page that you can go to. We also have this iReport project. If you go to ireport.com, that's CNN's, you know, user-submitted content site, and you can send in a video of support that we're going to actually show at that school. So we're going to sort of cut together a highlight reel from iReport videos that come in, and then send them to these women. And Edith, can you talk a little bit about like sort of the format that we're using for that, like these videos that people can send in?
Yeah, well, we visited I guess what would be the Mauritanian expatriate community in Ohio. There happens to be quite a few Mauritanians who have decided to leave Mauritania and now live in Ohio. And we visited them and asked them to translate a message of hope for these women, because most of them only speak Hassania, which is the like sort of tribal Arabic version of Arabic that a lot of the slave class speak. So they taught us how to say, "We are with you" in Hassania, and I cannot do it. What is it?
Yeah, I think it's Nakna Mak.
So we're asking people to give their own message, starting with that, so that these women understand, and then any other words that you feel are appropriate.
Yeah, so then they'll see these videos, they'll get this feeling that people all around the world, because we've gotten quite a few video submissions so far, but we need many more to sort of compile and show them, you know, that people all around the world are, one, aware that they're there, and care about their struggle. Like, these are people who have escaped and who are trying to sort of make a life for themselves in the free world, which is this incredibly difficult process. So, yeah. Was someone trying to jump in there? Oh, we had a follow-up question. Someone wanted to know where they could go to do that. So it's iReport, IREPORT.com is the site. You can also go to cnn.com/freedom, and there's a How to Help blog post that has a link directly to that iReport assignment. iReport.com is a site where people can send in their own news to CNN, and then we vet that news and sometimes use it in our programming.
Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Someone sent in the link. Cool. Does anyone else have a question, either in the group chat or people who are on the video chat or on Twitter? You can send it to @JDSutter, and we'll jump in. It looks like Suzanne is typing. Mark, do you have a question?
Not really.
Okay. Carlos, do you have anything?
I'm also getting emails from
Okay,
people
I
who
got
want
a.
to join, but I don't know.
It looks like we're getting some emails of people who want to join. We'll try to invite a few more people in.
Thanks for
So
joining us,
here's.
Carlos.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. I just got a question from Jessica about how long we were in Mauritania. And Edith, do you want to answer that? And I'll try to invite some of these people who are trying to join but can't.
Yeah, we were in Mauritania for 8 days. We arrived there on December 21st, 2011, and we ended up heading out on December 29th. Initially, we had planned to leave on January 1st. Our initial flight was supposed to be pretty much leaving at the New Year, but we decided to push our flight up by 2 days because we had an interview with an official with the Minister of Rural Development, and following that interview we were unsure of whether or not they were very happy about us being in the country, so we figured before they kicked us out that we would kick ourselves out. So 8 days total.
Yeah, and we spent some of that time in the capital talking with, primarily with abolitionists and people who had escaped, and then we took a couple trips out into the desert to, speak with people who live, out in the rural part of the country. Mauritania is historically a nomadic place, so you find a lot of sort of sparse population. Yeah. So I have another question about sort of how we reported the story. Like some of the some of the interviews we did were in secret because we weren't allowed to be in the country talking about issues of slavery. So we conducted some of them in the middle of the night and sort of were careful to watch, to see if anyone was following us or was sort of picking up on our locations or noticed who we were meeting with. Other points we were traveling with a government minder who was sort of assigned to watch what we were doing, and we'd have to find different ways to conduct the interviews quickly before he sort of noticed what we were talking about. It was slightly covert in some cases.
And I think just that we weren't there about locusts. That's kind of a double-part question because we did actually do a story about locusts, so we were there for that. But I would say they caused us. Yeah. I think we would ask certain questions, they would know, and definitely by the time we left, with the interview with the government, they knew.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. So it looks like Doug just joined the chat. Doug, do you have a question you'd like to ask? Doug is typing. Mark is typing.
I'm typing as I actually got to run, but thanks a lot, for.
Yeah.
I wish more people were in here, but.
Thanks for joining.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Couple people typing. Edith, is there anything else you wanted to add? I wonder what for you was the most emotional moment, or what part of the story you found most touching, or a person that stuck with you?
I don't know. Well, I guess one thing that we were talking about recently was that the further away we get from being in the country, the more it seems like everything we reported didn't happen, because and maybe this is how it's affecting people who read it, but it seems so extreme and so old world that we keep having to remind each other that these interviews we did were real and that these
And to
people we
watch them on
talked to-
video, like, I mean,
yeah, and to watch
they
them
are
on
real.
video, it reminds you of like, wow, that's actually what people said, and that's actually what's happening. And maybe that's part of the problem with the rest of the world knowing about this, is it seems so extreme that it can't be true, but it is, and that's what's surprising to me.
Jessica just asked, what surprised us most throughout the project, and I mean, I would say like a lot of things. Sometimes you go into interviews as a journalist and you kind of, know you have an answer that you would expect someone to say if you ask a certain question. You kind of like have an idea, what kinds of answers might come up. There were several, almost every interview actually on this trip, where we would ask a question and the answer would be something that I thought was just completely unexpected. Like we reunited a former slave with his former slave owner. They, grew up together in that relationship, and I expected the person who was a slave as a young person to really resent this man whose family and who personally had enslaved him, and that resentment just wasn't really there. Like if you watch, you can watch the documentary that Edith shot on our site, and you see that reunion, and they're hugging and laughing and talking about sort of just memories, like it wouldn't look that much different than like sort of old friends. And another thing that shocked me is when we interviewed this guy who was enslaved later, he sort of said that nothing about his life really changed after he was granted his freedom and started being paid, which I found just very shocking and very indicative of like sort of the psychological change that people have in their minds, where they don't fully maybe grasp like what's being done to them, or sort of the system that they're a part of. So I mean, I was surprised like continually by it. Like everyone we talked to, everything we saw, it was a very eye-opening trip. So we've got a question from Doug. Edith, do you want to read this one?
Sure. Doug asks, he says that in some cases we didn't have much time to speak with people that we believed were slaves. How open were they in speaking about their condition, and did they seem to trust you to talk openly about it? That's true. Frequently we didn't have that much time to speak with people who we thought would be slaves. Mostly because we had a government minder with us who was not going to allow us to talk about this. But I think the people we talked with, they seemed very open. They seemed more willing to talk about it than we could have asked about it, if that makes sense. Like, frequently we would just stop and talk to people, and it was just a guess. Maybe these people are the people we need to talk to. And every time they had something to say about the topic. Sometimes we didn't even bring up the topic of slavery. We were talking about food or something, and they would bring up this topic. And so I guess they were fairly open.
Yeah, and I will say that like in the story we're purposefully clear about like how we conducted those interviews, because we did sometimes stop unexpectedly, on the side of the road, like while our government vehicle that was with us like continued to drive ahead, and our reasoning, and then we would conduct the interviews quickly before they sort of came back to notice. And the reason, like, I put that in there, when we put it in the video too, is to sort of say, like, the limited context in which we conducted some of these interviews. Like, we were, able to get people to talk openly about it, but it was in a very quick conversation. Ideally, you would want to spend a lot of time with these interview subjects and like really get a firm sense of what their life is like and what their relationship is like with, the person who, in one case they said that, with the person who enslaved them. But it was impossible to do given the circumstances. So we relied on those quick interviews and, a lot of context from people who are experts in this topic and people who are abolitionists on the ground who have been fighting against it and know the stories of, lots of people who live in these conditions or have in the past. So, I mean, it's just an effort to be honest about the sort of level of information that we have, or in some of those cases what the quick interviews don't have. So that's a good question. Nick, it looks like you joined in the group chat. Is there anything that you wanted to ask? Looks like you're typing. Hi.
Hey, Nick.
Nick is drawing a blank. It's okay. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up, but thanks everyone for joining this little experiment. If you have questions like after this, feel free to send them in either here on Google+, and I'll try to address them there. You can, shoot me a question on Twitter at JD Sutter. Edith, you're at
Not Edith MC.
Edith with a Y, MC. So you can send us questions there or here on Google+, or comment on any of the stories. The main project page is cnn.com/Mauritania, MAURITANIA. Like we said earlier, it would be great if anyone wants to send in an iReport to these women who are in a center for escaped slaves. I think that would mean a lot to those people. So that's ireport.com, and you can find the assignment about Mauritania and send in a video there. So yeah, thanks again for hanging with us, and we'll hope to do something like this again in the future. So thanks. Cheers.